everyone. Thanks for coming. See some friends that I know from the Chester area also. Um, and I am going to share my screen with you and show you, let's see. I hope everybody can see this okay. Spangled fritillary on butterfly weed, Asclepias tuberosa. And sustainable landscapes are healthy, responsive to the environment. They can positively contribute to the development of healthy communities, and that would be healthy in physically and emotionally. They're healthy for birds, insects, wildlife, carbon sequestration, and clean water and clean air. While energy efficiency remains the holy grail for green buildings, sustainable landscapes help to clean the air, promote water conservation, prevent resource depletion, and create value through economic, social, and environmental benefits that we all can feel every day. This is a gorgeous garden. It's autumn in the Monk's Garden at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. And this is all native plants. So when designing your land, your yard, no matter how big or small it is, you want to think about designing using your existing landform. Think about plant communities rather than single plant species. And you think about solar exposure. When we do designing, we want to think about existing landform, plant communities rather than single plants, rather than a single plant species, and your solar exposure, how much sun or shade there is, whether it's dappled sun or, and think about your existing hydrology and your existing landform. Depending on where you are, existing landform might have already been changed for you, such as this picture where this is a development, a neighborhood suburban development where in many places that are designed now are not really thinking about using the existing landform. They just want to try to get rid of water as quickly as possible. Well, a better way of thinking is to have us infiltrate our water and not send it off as quickly as possible, but let it soak in. So whatever you have, like this swale here, we can change it and use it in better ways. We can stop the water with using rocks and have a little boardwalk go over it and try to get some of that water to soak in and infiltrate into the ground instead of just running off on the swale that was developed. But you have to make sure you do it right, because if a subdivision went in, you don't want to stop too much water and cause another problem. And then when you don't have water, but you want to create habitat, and let's say you have a slope, this is a yard in State College, Pennsylvania. And this is the Ganosa garden. And I created a pond since we had a slope, and we wanted to create some habitat. And when you're creating habitat, you want to think about several things. You want to think about providing shelter, food, and water. And so here's the water aspect. And also it sounds nice, and it's really peaceful to listen to I don't know if you can see that there's a little waterfall right here. The other thing is, and this is again the Ganosa garden, you want to think about creating outdoor rooms for yourself. The wildlife doesn't need the rooms, we do. And you want to kind of make different areas that you want to be in, just like you do inside your house. You don't only have one great space. You might have a big space, but then you also have smaller spaces in different areas. And we do that kind of thing outside in in your garden, in your yard, on your land. Also, you want to use existing contours. And when you're thinking about using the existing hillside, contours are like the different levels of landform. And you want to design, you see there's a path here of stone. And then there's also a kind of an area, a grassy area. And you want to think about planting in layers, not only horizontally. So we're going from a less shaded kind of grassy area into a full shaded. In the back behind the bench is a full shaded area. But you also are doing it vertically. So you want to think about planting an herbaceous layer, your perennials and grasses. And then you think about doing a shrub layer, and understory trees, and then canopy trees. And also, native vines also to go up and carry you from the ground level up into the trees. And this is another example of using, thinking about all the levels of the vertical levels of designing. So you see that there are some rhododendrons there that are the shrub layer, and there are some understory trees. I think this is, I think this one is Cornus Florida. And then there is the herbaceous layer. And this is a grassy path going through a forest, and it's just really peaceful and beautiful to walk through. So you think about this one being dappled shade, and further down the path, you see it's sunnier. And I think that behind in the path, it was a little bit shadier. So vertical plant communities and vertical design, as well as layering, as well as horizontal design. So then when you're thinking about construction, you want to have an area that you are going to not really, you want to do a limit of your disturbance. And this is kind of an example of it, where you can leave alone the perimeter and just disturb the parts that you need to disturb. So different areas, and depending on what you're doing, you have a different amount of disturbance necessary. Let's say you're building a house. Well, there have been places that I've seen that you can really only have your limit of disturbance be 10 to 15 feet outside of the building footprint. This is a big job, though. That's a hard thing to do, though it's doable. But the people constructing have to really be on board with doing it that way, because you really have to think about limiting your disturbance to that much. But there are good reasons for it. You want to prevent soil compaction. You want to not harm the existing trees and shrubs and all of the soil structure that you have. If you have a place, well, you want to try to avoid doing anything like what is commonly done, where people will scrape off a lot of the topsoil, stockpile it into a big pile, and then after the project is finished, they lay it out again. But by the time it's been stockpiled in a big pile, it becomes really sterile, because it's too much weight. It kills all of the mycorrhizae and all the bugs and any other things that are insects that are living in there. So additionally, as you see here, if you're going to do construction or digging or anything like that near a tree, near trees, you're going to want to go and you put your limit fence at the drip line. And the most disturbance to roots that a tree can withstand, and this is hard for it, is 50%. But that is hard on the trees. And the picture that you see in the top right of the construction fence around the trees, and that's pretty close. It's closer to the trees than is nice, but sometimes you have to do that. But when you can avoid it, then you want to try to avoid it. So you should, at the very least, limit your disturbance to 40 feet beyond the building perimeter, but try to keep it as little as possible. It can be down to 20. 10 feet beyond surface walkways, patios, and surface parking. And then also 25 feet beyond constructed areas with permeable surfaces. So where you want your water to infiltrate, because when you start driving around and compacting the soil too much, it's not going to be permeable anymore. Now, again, also what we want to do is preserve existing contours and soil and hydrology. Let's see. Let me back up actually to this one and tell you that what we would also want to do is not remove any plants other than invasive non-natives or non-natives, and try not to disturb all of the plants that are natives. So we also don't want to concentrate the stormwater in any one area. So what we want to do is preserve the existing contours and hydrology. And you see what is going on in this site. It's all wet and too wet, but they're still trying to have a driveway and a lawn. So really the answer to that is, rather than fighting against something and just doing it whatever you need to have there anyway, rather embrace it. This site here could have a garden here, and that would take it could have a bog garden, and it could take all the water and use the water using plant materials, and then you wouldn't have an area that just can't be mowed and can't be used, and it would instead be beautiful, such as this. And this is Wakehurst Place Bog Garden. You embrace what you have rather than try to fight against it. Let's see. And historically, we're just culturally sort of, we feel like we have to change nature and fight against it and, tame it or something. But rather instead, we could embrace it and use what is there for us and appreciate what we have, and what we can use here that are native plants here, and native and natural wet places. And that actually will take, and if we use our natural wet places, we won't have to create rain gardens because we've got them all over the place anyway. So here are also some places that have embraced the existing hydrology, and you don't have to not use it. You can put in a boardwalk and walk through, and also have all the wonderful plants that you wouldn't actually have. It opens up a whole palette of plant opportunities and the accompanying wildlife with all these plants. So these are native, and I believe these are all native to Vermont, actually, and they're native wildflowers, not just wildflowers, which brings up a point that many people don't. They're unsuspecting when you get a wildflower seed packet, because you want to plant native wildflowers for insects and pollinators. You have to watch out, because so many of the wildflower packets include non-native plants, and actually many of them, sadly, include invasive non-native plants. So I'm not sure why, but often you'll see gypsophila, which is in many wildflower packets that aren't specified native, and also Dame's rocket, Hesperus matronalis, which is what some people think of as phlox, but it's not phlox. It blooms earlier, it's in the springtime, and very soon we'll see it all over the place now. And it's not phlox, it's not a native. Okay, so really having a wet area is actually really terrific, and people who don't have it are, you can create it actually. So here is looking at embracing existing contours and not mowing, and it's just gorgeous to look at this spot. It's another beautiful and exhilarating because of the lupins in the back. And the grasses look so soft and inviting, and you don't have to mow. It's that and the rock path is natural looking, but you don't have to have it. The first slide showed a non-natural looking path, but it still was a nice place to be. And here is more embracing slope and not needing to have lawn. And there's a little bit of a path through there, but not much of one. This is, let's see, this is O'Grady's design in Northern Virginia. There's also, and here's some more embracing hillsides. And this one on the bottom left is a hillside meadow restoration that I'm working at Springfield Hospital. And last year we began this restoration of the hillside, and that quickly some beautiful and didn't even stop mowing in the beginning part of the year, but I guess halfway through the summer they stopped mowing, and still some of the plants are surviving and came up. And this is Euthymia graminifolia, and with a butterfly on it. So already attracting pollinators. This is an interesting thing. This is a type of goldenrod on the bottom left, and it's used to be all solidago, but now they're split up into different genuses. And so here is more of that hillside restoration, and down below you see the road there. That's the road before in front of the Springfield Hospital. So actually, this is saving a lot of time. It's money, fossil fuels, and restoring pollinators and insects to feed birds. And this is also, some of you are familiar with this, it's a dangerously steep area that people were mowing regularly, and really an unsafe place to be mowing. So now we want to think about our planting plan. So if you are going to use natives instead of non-natives, or native cultivars, then you are getting wildlife value added. This up here in the top left is hummingbird moth, snowberry clearwing on Monarda, and below it is the caterpillar for the snowberry clearwing, chomping on a snowberry leaf. And to the right is the snowberry plant bush, which I think is just gorgeous and beautiful plant. It has throughout the whole summer berries and pink buds through the whole summer, and it's just gorgeous. And then below here is another view of the clearwing. Unfortunately, that one is on an orange hawkweed, which we have all over the place here too. And that one is an invasive plant. So, but the clear, many birds and insects use the nectar and the seeds and the berries from the plants that are non-native, but they won't use the leaves. They won't eat the leaves. So it's not supporting them in the way of letting them procreate. Their species won't survive if they don't have their host plants. So though, and the birds need the insects to have their host plants because the birds are feeding their nestlings, their chicks, on insects and caterpillar and all different larvae. They are not feeding their chicks on the baby birds don't eat plants. They only eat insects for the most part. So here is a swallowtail, eastern tiger swallowtail on Monarda. And that is the native Monarda, that color there. And the other colors of Monarda are not, they're native cultivars. There is a Baltimore oriole on a meadow row. And here is a looper, an inchworm, and I don't know what kind, on Rudbeckia. So these are all, great plants and wildlife that would be supporting with the native plants. So this brings us up to the good, the not so good, the bad, and the ugly, the very, very ugly in the plant world. It's hard for me to go out for a walk in springtime and take a look at everything greening up right away, because most of the things that we see greening up right now are the invasive non-natives. They start earlier and they end later than for the most part, than the native plants. Not all, but mostly. So here's the good. Native species, straight species. And this is a picture of Dyervilla, and it's called bush honeysuckle or Dyervilla honeysuckle, but it's not a honeysuckle. But the leaves look similar to it, so I think that's why they call it that. And this is a native, and it's wonderful for many different species, including the clearwing, I believe. Below it is one that's not so good. And there are a lot of people that have different thoughts on native cultivars, and I am one of the people that know that native cultivars, while they're not as bad as the others, are not as good as just using a straight native. For example, with the Dyervilla, and I'm going to be giving a talk on this next week on this particular issue. This Dyervilla with the red leaves, the brownish red leaves, actually the insects that use this as their host plant will not put their eggs on the Dyervilla with the different colored leaves, because this colored leaf shows them that it's poisonous to them. And they don't know that this one actually is not poisonous because it's just a cultivar that people have developed. But they're not going to use this. They'll use the flowers and get the nectar, but they won't put their eggs on it, and their larvae won't eat the leaves. So that's why that's not so good. The bad, which is, this is an Ilex crenata. It's a Japanese holly. And, there are loads of different kinds of holly. And we do have a couple of hollies, which I wanted to put Ilex verticillata here, but I didn't. And the Ilex verticillata you'll see out through the winter holding beautiful bright red berries and orangey red berries. But it loses its leaves. And a little further south, we have a native Ilex. Ilex is holly, and that's Ilex opaca, which is a tree holly, and it's just really cool and gorgeous. But this is a little too cold here, for the time being anyway. But the non-native plants, hardly any insects use them. There are a few plants that some insects will use, but most of them are not going to be used by as a host plant by any insects. And then, so it's better to plant a native, and we do have various native evergreens to use instead. We can, but here in Vermont anyway, we fill up with snow so that it'll all be covered for the most part. And then we move on to the ugly, the very bad, invasive non-natives. So this plant on the bottom right is purple loosestrife, which is still being sold in many nurseries. And unfortunately, not all states have banned it, though many have. But this is a picture of it and what it does, which is it eventually takes over and creates a monoculture. And while that, you might think, I myself don't think it looks beautiful because it's only one thing everywhere, as far as the eye can see. And it has ruined that wetland. Additionally, on the top is also a picture of the Montezuma National Wildlife Refuge, which is in New York State, and Route 90 goes through it. It's west of Syracuse. This is all Phragmites, and it has totally taken over this this huge Montezuma wetland that is part of the Great Flyway. So, and now it holds only Phragmites here and is not useful to many things. So it's not really habitat anymore. It's just this great big sea of Phragmites. So the U.S. Forest Service really has, so there's a great book called, that the Brooklyn Botanical Gardens put out, Native Alternatives to Invasive Plants. Or you can talk to a lot of different people, and there are other books and websites out there for this. Call me up if you have a great plant that you love and it's not native. I'm pretty sure I'll be able to give you an alternative to it. If not right away, soon. And the USDA and the Forest Service all are on board with that. As a matter of fact, here's a website that gives you alternatives from the USDA and the Forest Service. And they say something that really I'd like to just read to you. Kick the invasive exotic gardening habit with great native plant alternatives. It's time to eradicate those unruly invasives from your garden and add new choices to your plant inventory. Invasive exotics wreak havoc on natural areas. You've all seen how English ivy smothers wildflowers and topples shade trees. As a matter of fact, the Oriental bittersweet is also, you can regularly see young trees that have been broken off midway by Oriental bittersweet. And Japanese honeysuckle strangles shrubs and trees. So it's difficult to leave your gardening standards behind, but necessary if we're going to keep on having, supporting our wildlife and having natural areas. So, and even things that are not on the naughty list yet, such as this. I don't know if we've got Bradford pears being planted around Vermont as well. And this one is Ohio, one is Maryland. Outside of Philadelphia, everything is just covered at this time with Bradford pear or Callery pear. And that's all of this stuff. And it's just a terrible invasion and taking over everywhere along all the roads. So not only that, I'm not even sure why landscape architects continue to specify Callery pears, because they're actually weak wooded and they break and drop branches. But this is reason enough for me to never want to use it. Okay. So plant choices. You can find, let's see, there's the Ladybird Johnson wildflower Flower Center that has a really good website that gives you information about, you put in your address, your zip code, and you can find great plants to use, native plants to use in your area. Additionally, the National Wildlife Federation has it, and the website is there on the bottom. There also you put your website, your zip code in, and it'll tell you. So one terrific book, actually Douglas Tallamy, the book on the left, Bringing Nature Home, is an entomologist, which is just he's got wonderful information in that Bringing Nature Home book about all the various plants that are used by various different insects. And also another great book for native plants is Don Leopold's book. And he is a professor over in Syracuse. He's got a bunch of really great YouTube videos as well, if you want to go watch that. And I think Douglas Tallamy does as well. So there, if you want to get somebody in to do a design for you and, get plants, tell you what plants to use or something like that, or you can look it up on websites or in these books. Let's see. What you want to do also is not just go plant by plant, as I said in the beginning, but think about communities. So you don't want to just plant a whole bunch of flowers. You want to make sure you get grasses in there and sedges and different types of native herbaceous layer and shrubs and trees. And as I said, vertical as well as horizontal. And this garden on the bottom left, well, the book on the top right is terrific for designing with plant communities, not just a plant here and a plant there, because you might have a couple of really great plants, but they really don't necessarily go together. If you want Trillium, you're not going to plant that out in your meadow. You're going to plant that under trees in your shady area, together with, some beech and sugar maple and that kind of thing. And you have to get the right plants together rather than just any, or if you want it to be really low maintenance and to just go together well. And as you see in that bottom left, there's a path going through and it goes over to a forest, a wooded area. So that's horizontal structure. And it's more kind of maintained because you have big patches of different things. So you can do it in different styles. You don't just have to have it all willy-nilly or very natural, You can do it according to what your taste is as well. You also want to think, speaking of solar, shading appropriately. You do passive solar design with your landscape as well as your buildings. So you see that you see that on the top left, if you have deciduous trees in front of your building, in the summertime, they're going to shade your house, your building, and your windows. And in the wintertime, when you need it more cooler inside, and then in the winter, they drop their leaves, and then you have the sun coming in when you want the sun to come in and heat your building. So, and you, of course, use that same principle for putting in evergreen trees and shrubs, and you do that for windbreak, and for winter interest. But you wouldn't want to shade your house in the winter with your evergreen trees. Now you can see an example of that down below. This is a site in Vermont, and I'm not sure where in Vermont it is. So also, depending on what kind of tree, at top right here, what kind of tree, what kind of shade, what shape, what height, and you design accordingly. So also, you want to, when you're mulching, and this is leading us into maintenance, you really want to mulch with, if possible, with leaves, and don't double your work. Don't blow all your leaves away and then bring mulch in. Rather, instead, leave the leaves there. Use the leaves that fall. Use needles where they fall. If you're, under white pines, and those needles fall every second year. You can compost your leaves and have really wonderful leaf mold and use that. You can, if you're going to, and if you have to purchase bark mulch, you'll just want to do that really only one time, and if possible, because you want things to fill in. You don't want just a sea of mulch with plants plopped here and there, all spread out. Really, the mulch initially began as something that people would put in only when they first planted to keep the moisture in the soil. But then it sort of somehow took hold as a design element. And then if you're going to be using mulch, you'll want to make sure that you don't use cypress mulch, and you'll want to try to avoid the dyed mulches. So one thing that's important, if you're going to be using mulch, you want to make sure you don't do what's in the top right and make mulch volcanoes, and that's a small one. I've seen bigger ones. This is very bad for trees. The bottom left is also not good. You want to keep your mulch at most 2 to 3 inches deep, and keep it 2 to 3 inches away from your trunk, your tree trunk. Some plants, a few plants here and there won't mind, but for the most part, the bark on trees that is above ground is not supposed to be kept wet. It'll get insects, it'll get mold, and it'll be unhealthy. Imagine if your skin that's not meant to keep wet was wet all the time. That's happened when you've left a Band-Aid on, and look how it gives you an ulcer on your skin. Whereas your skin in your mouth and in your nose that's supposed to keep wet, that's healthy to be wet. Same with trees and their bark on the roots compared to the bark on the trunks and the branches. Root bark is meant to be wet, and the other bark is not. It's different kind of bark. So don't do what you see here. Let's see. Hardscape when necessary. Here's the path. Those paths again. It's needed to have a boardwalk through your wetland, but not through your woods necessarily. And you can then mow new and different paths if there's something else that becomes of interest elsewhere on your property. When you need the hardscape, use it, of course. And brick set in sand, that will let more moisture go through than more paving. Mm-hmm. I'm going to just move a little bit more quickly now. We're almost done. And here's some other paths with examples of just grassy area or a sandy path area. And these are just examples of different paths that you can have. So, and here's one more, which just was so beautiful that I wanted to put it in. And it does not have all native plants, but you can do this design also with natives, but this is done in a natural style. But this can be done also with native plants. So why? Another thing is maintenance, and why we want to change the way we're maintaining things. This is bobolink, and bobolinks are a species that are declining, and they need grasslands. So the male is in the top right, and the females are on the left. And then there's their nest, which is down on the ground in the field. And there are the nestlings. So go to the bobolinkproject.com and many various other places that will help you with when to mow and when not to mow, because you still can have hay fields, but you just change your mowing your haying sequence, and the same with your meadows. Additionally, for let's see, for for spring cleanup, you want to wait as long as possible, preferably after June 15th, so that you can preserve the overwintering insects in the stems of old plants, and also in the litter on the bottom, the leaves and all the stuff on the ground. You don't want to clean that up because there are overwintering larvae and moths and caterpillars and salamanders and efts, and don't dig until later, because the toads are down there still hibernating until a certain time, and you need to stop digging after a certain time. I dug a little bit too late my potatoes last year, and I dug. Fortunately, I think I didn't harm this toad, but I actually thought it was another potato on the side of down there, and it wasn't, because it started blinking at me. Why are you rubbing me? So I want to make sure you don't dig and plant too early or too late. And there are times for all these things. Additionally, in the autumn, you want to don't do autumn cleanup, because if you leave those seed heads, the birds will come and eat seeds through the whole winter until the things are down. Also, in the stems of goldenrods and other different herbaceous plants, in the stems, there are larvae overwintering. And so even if you have to clean it up, take them and set them somewhere, break them off at the bottom and set them somewhere. Don't throw them away. Set them upright somewhere. And of course, fertilizers, herbicides, and pesticides. If you do all of this right, you really won't need your herbicides. You don't want to use pesticides, because you want all those bugs and insects to feed the birds. And you want your plants to be eaten also. If you have a good working ecosystem, they won't be eating too much or too little. It'll be just right. Focus also on preservation and restoration. Mm-hmm. I'm going to stop there. Oh, and let me say a couple more things. One more thing is, leave your dead trees if they're not in danger of hitting something that you don't want hit, like your car or your house, because that's going to support all sorts of other birds that want insects or want to, as you see the pileated up in the top right, they're cavity nesters, and the downy and hairy woodpeckers in the top, they want all those insects in your tree, in your dead trees. And the bats, the small brown bat, I think is also we have cavity nesters for bats, and put bat houses up as well. So I'm going to stop there. There's more I could say, but I'd like to have time to take questions.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. I feel like you're giving us permission to not do anything in the garden right now. We can just leave the leaves or eventually take them and use them as mulch.
Absolutely. That's the recommendation.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Well, I wonder, with some of the images that you showed us, and you're talking about using native plants, I mean, I have a question. One is, if I go to a garden center, are they here in Vermont anyway, can I shop around and sort of say I'm such and such zone, and know that I'm going to be purchasing something that has been vetted, it is not an invasive plant? And then actually my follow-up question to that is it possible to plant something that really is self-maintaining? There are some beautiful paths you showed us. Once you plant, can you plant with that kind of thinking in mind?
Yep, right, absolutely.
Take care of itself.
So the answer to your second question is absolutely, and that's the goal. The goal, but you must always, the one thing that you're going to always have to do is to go and really watch for any invasive non-natives that are coming in. So you won't have to watch for the non-natives that are not invasive, but some invasives you do have to watch for constantly. But the more that you work at it, the less you'll find. But you do still have to work at it because birds are going to eat the berries of like autumn olive and honeysuckle and barberry, and they're going to fly over your property and they're going to poop there. And so those berries will, those seeds will get planted. So you do have to watch, but it won't be as bad as in the beginning when you have to do the initial cleanup. As for going to the nurseries, unfortunately, some nurseries are really great at that. Some nurseries are not so great. And I think in part of the problem is the nursery industry, because there are a lot of plants that are not considered, they're not on the banned list, they're not on the noxious weed list yet. But for example, calorie pear, people are still planting calorie pear. You can still buy them everywhere. Same with a whole bunch of other invasive plants, unfortunately. But so you have to ask for natives. And some places, some nurseries are really good and have a lot of natives, and some are very good and don't even have any non-native invasives. They all have non-natives still, for the most part. Not everybody, but for the most part. So you have to ask for natives and not hardy. Don't ask for plants hardy to our area. That is going to give you anything that lives in this zone, this planting zone.
All right. Well, if anyone would like, you can unmute and ask Cheryl a question. There is a lot to take in. There certainly is, even with, what would you advise a beginner who, how can you start small? How do you begin thinking about a space and working on it?
I think that you begin by finding out what you have. Look at it through the entire season first, okay? Through all 4 seasons. Don't do anything until you look all 4 seasons if you have a space. Then you're going to pay attention to what plants are flowering and what are not. You're going to pay attention to the amount of light you get, the amount of sunlight, how many hours for different times of year. And you're going to look at what non-natives you have, what invasives you have. Initially, you're going to take out the invasives and then continue to watch. And then you go on from there. My recommendation would be then to take, then take out the non-natives and to slowly but surely get your natives in and read some books and look on those websites and choose according to your area. And you'll want to try to have things flowering throughout the entire growing season and berrying and seeding. And you want to try to make sure there's water.
Well, that's funny because that's the same recommendation I've heard when people say they first buy a house or they get into a house. They say, spend a year just getting the feel of it before you don't do anything radical. And that probably applies to outdoor spaces too, because you want to be thinking, oh, I want a barbecue. Where might that belong? And maybe use the natural landscape to suggest what to do. And
exactly.
And to create almost like little rooms. You had a design with circles and squares. I mean,
exactly. You're creating your rooms outside with what you want to do out there. You think about how you want to use your space. And so then when you think about what you want to do out there, like, do I want to have a meditation garden? Do I want to have a barbecue area? Do I want a place where I have picnics all the time with friends? You think about what you're going to want to do in the different places. Design accordingly.
Well, the time is coming and the grass is slowly turning green. And so there's a lot to look forward to. Actually, someone asked, can you give some examples of native vines and maybe in their regular terminology,
Yep.
something common name.
Okay, so common name versus
the
Latin name. So then you come up with problems. I'm going to give both. I won't really give only one, because sometimes a common name is going to be different for different places.
Mhm.
But let's see. And I also don't remember the common names sometimes, but Dutchman's pipe vine, which is Aristolochia, and Campsis radicans, which is trumpet vine, Lonicera sempervirens, which is trumpet honeysuckle, I think. Oh, wisteria. The Chinese and Japanese wisteria is invasive and non-native, but rather instead use American wisteria, which is Wisteria macrostachys. And there's another one, Kentuckiensis, which I think is for further south. But the native wisteria will bloom through the whole year, but not as big of a flush of blooms in the springtime. Okay, other vines. I think that's it for vines for now.
That's okay. We got another question here for recommendations. Favorites for part sunny hillside natives for a butterfly garden.
Okay. That I think you can just go ahead and put your, well, I mean, all right. Rudbeckia, Penstemon digitalis, grasses, you need to get grasses in there as well. Monarda, which is, oh, excuse me, I said Monarda, I knew it, that's bee balm. Milkweeds, and not the butterfly weed, but rather common milkweed, or swamp milkweed if it's a wet area. If it's a wet area, Lobelia cardinalis, which is stunning, and what's that? Turtlehead for wet or dry area, but they prefer wet. I think, let's see. Oh, many goldenrods. So, and then just, you can look at those several websites, the National Wildlife Federation, and I forgot the other one that I had up there.
Well, that's great. Happy gardening, happy planning.